There are people who hurt you the most not with yelling, not with drama, not with anger, but with a warm hug, a friendly smile, or a seemingly caring question like, "How have you been lately?" They cook dinner, send sweet little messages just to check in, and show up in your life as if they have every right to simply because they're family. But right behind those gestures is a lump in your throat. You can't explain, maybe a comment that makes you feel small, a joke that forces a polite chuckle, or a look that silences you even when your mind is screaming to speak. You walk away from the conversation feeling hollow. You can't put your finger on why, but you know something in you just slipped away. You ask yourself, did I do something wrong? And then, or am I just being too sensitive? The truth is you didn't do anything wrong. And no, you're not too sensitive. You're in a toxic relationship disguised as love, the kind of relationship that makes you feel guilty for asking questions, ashamed for setting boundaries, and convinced that silence is the only way to keep the peace. The danger isn't just in what they repeatedly do. It's in how you were taught to accept it from a young age. You were taught to be the bigger person, to endure, to be respectful, even if that meant sacrificing your voice, your emotions, and your sense of self. Over time, you shrink not physically, but spiritually. You laugh when you're insulted, apologize for your own feelings, and call it normal just to keep the illusion of harmony. You start calling silence peace even though your soul has never stopped screaming. But today we're going to name what has been distorted for far too long. This is not love. This is not care. These are toxic behaviors, subtle forms of control wrapped in something we call family. And if you feel like you're slowly losing yourself in relationships that seem impossible to walk away from, then this video is a mirror for you to see clearly, understand deeply, and reclaim yourself. Because Stoic philosophy does not teach you to suffer in silence. It teaches you to distinguish between what must be accepted and what must never be tolerated again. It doesn't ask you to rebel, nor does it tell you to become cold. It simply reminds you peace doesn't come from enduring everything. It comes from knowing what does not deserve a place in your inner place. So if anything in this video strikes a nerve, don't look away. That's not weakness. That's your intuition waking up. And from this moment forward, you get to choose again, to choose clarity over confusion, self-respect over guilt, and yourself over the need to keep pleasing others. Let's begin with the very first behavior, one that seems harmless on the surface, but can quietly destroy you from the inside if left unchecked. Constant criticism, the kind that slowly makes you question your own voice. 1. Constant criticism, the silent weapon that destroys your self-worth. Not everyone who hurts you does so loudly or with obvious anger. Some people do it with a soft voice, a subtle shake of the head, or well-meaning advice repeated over and over under the mask of concern. They don't make you cry on the spot. Instead, you walk away from the conversation feeling smaller, as if your very presence had quietly diminished. They don't insult you outright, but they leave behind an echo that keeps you silent for hours, second-guessing yourself and doubting what you feel. You begin to hesitate before speaking up, overthink every word, and sometimes apologize for things you're not even sure were wrong. It's not because you're insecure, it's because you've grown used to being judged constantly, not just for what you do, but for who you are. They don't tell you a specific action was wrong. They make you feel like you are always the one in the wrong. And when that comes from people you once believed loved you unconditionally, it becomes even harder to tell the difference between feedback and belittling, between care and control, between love and harm. Constant criticism is not the same as constructive feedback. Real feedback aims to help you grow. It focuses on specific behaviors, comes with respect, and lifts you up. But constant criticism is vague, repetitive, and often targets your identity, leaving you with the feeling that you're never good enough, never worthy, and that there's no way to ever get it right. The danger isn't in the volume of the words, but in their frequency and gentle delivery, the kind that disarms you and slowly makes you accept harm as part of normal communication. Eventually, you stop reacting to the criticism. Instead, you quietly adjust yourself every day, the way you speak, the way you dress, even the way you stay silent just to avoid upsetting someone else. You're no longer trying to grow, you're just trying to survive. And that's when you lose the right to simply be yourself. You can't even remember the last time you felt natural, because you're always bracing for a comment, a judgment, or someone's disappointment. This doesn't just affect your emotions, it affects your nervous system. Every critical word tenses you up. Every moment of disapproval makes you shrink just a bit more. Over time, you live with a constant feeling that something about you is fundamentally wrong. Your body responds like it's under threat, even if nothing around you seems loud or dangerous. You don't know why you forget things, why you can't focus, or why you feel drained, but deep down, you know you're slowly slipping into self-erasure. What's most terrifying isn't what they say, it's how you start accepting it as normal. You no longer call it hurt. You call it just how they are, or they mean well, or even I need to learn to handle it. But the more you normalize it, the more disconnected you become from your own truth, the harder it becomes to tell love from control. You stop standing up for yourself not because you agree, but because you're too exhausted to keep defending your right to be respected. According to Stoic philosophy, what you tolerate, you silently give permission for. If you don't set a boundary, you're training others to believe they can keep treating you in ways that harm you. And if you stay silent for too long, you risk losing your voice entirely, the very voice that defines who you are. Losing your voice isn't just about not speaking, it's about losing your inner compass, the thing that guides your emotions, your values, and your sense of meaning. You don't need to get angry to protect yourself, but you do need to notice the quiet signals inside you, that instinct to shrink when they enter the room, the urge to avoid their gaze when they start talking, or that unease that arises just from being yourself. That's not weakness, that's the result of being hurt for too long. And healing doesn't begin with compromise. It begins with a decision to no longer allow it. You can speak calmly but clearly, I want feedback, but not in a way that makes me feel worse every time you speak. Or, if you really care, I need you to say it with respect. You don't need to argue, you don't need to explain, and you don't need to apologize for setting a boundary. You only need to stand for yourself, not with raised voices, but with intentional silence and boundaries that come with consequences. If they react negatively when you start protecting your self-worth, it's not because you're too sensitive, it's because they've grown too used to your silence. But the moment you stop staying quiet, you're not just reclaiming your dignity, you're taking back the person you were never meant to lose. 2. Violation of personal boundaries when control is disguised as love. Not all boundary violations are loud, blatant, or obvious at first. Sometimes they begin with something so small you almost let it slide: a late-night call without warning, someone entering your private space without asking, or a question that seems caring but feels intrusive. At first you might feel a little uncomfortable, but you stay silent, telling yourself they didn't mean anything by it, that because they're family, it's somehow acceptable. So you let it go. But that silence, that letting it go, becomes the open door. Because when you don't push back, they don't stop. They step a little further each time. They read your messages just to check, walk into your room without knocking, because this is your mother's house, or make decisions on your behalf because dad knows what's best. They never ask for permission, but they always have an excuse. They don't seek your input, yet insist they're doing it out of love, because they care, because you're still too young to know better. You don't speak up not because you agree, but because you're afraid of hurting their feelings. You fear being labeled ungrateful, selfish, or disrespectful. So, you trade your inner peace for outward harmony. You allow others to rearrange your belongings, read your journal, make financial decisions for you, or interfere in your most personal choices, from career and relationships to the smallest matters of self-autonomy. Eventually, you begin to forget your boundaries ever existed. You live in a space between closeness and quiet resentment, feeling guilty for just wanting peace, selfish for needing space, ashamed for asking to be left alone. You no longer call it control. You call it family. You no longer call it manipulation. You call it sacrifice. But real love never asks you to surrender your authority over your own life. It doesn't demand that you shrink so someone else can feel comfortable. True love includes respect, and without respect, what's left is simply possession dressed up as concern, justified by blood ties. Some people cross your boundaries not out of malice, but because they were never taught what boundaries are. They were raised in environments where love meant full access, where closeness was confused with control, and where saying no was labeled as cold or rebellious. But others? They cross boundaries with intention, not with noise, but with subtlety, calculation, and just enough pressure to make it hard for you to push back. They don't storm and they probe. They don't command, they suggest. They don't force, they nudge with guilt. And they do it so cleverly that you feel rude for refusing, or heartless for asking for privacy. They twist your compassion into a contract you never agreed to sign. The more you yield, the more they take. The more you explain, the more they treat it as an excuse. And when you finally set a boundary, they don't ask why, they simply declare you've changed. But what they really mean is you're no longer easy to control. And that's the moment when you need to listen to yourself, not them. Stoic philosophy does not promote cold detachment, but it does emphasize that inner peace begins with clarity about what is yours and what is not. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that our soul takes the color of our thoughts and is stained by those we allow into our minds without discernment. If you don't set boundaries, you're not just giving people access to your life, you're letting them dull your ability to feel, choose, and truly be present. So when someone crosses a personal boundary, you don't need to over-explain. You don't need to get angry. You just need to be clear. That makes me uncomfortable. Please ask before showing up. This is my decision to make. These words don't have to be long, but they must be firm. They don't have to be harsh, but they must come with a boundary. Because if you don't take your own limits seriously, no one else will. And most importantly, a boundary without consequences is just a suggestion. If they continue to ignore what you've clearly stated, you don't owe them another warning. You owe yourself action, whether that means pulling back your time, changing how you interact, or, if necessary, walking away from the relationship altogether. You're not building walls, you're drawing lines. You're not cutting off love, you're protecting the core of your self-worth. And when you stop treating your personal boundaries as optional, you'll begin to see clearly who truly loves you and who only sticks around when they can control you. 3. Gaslighting, distorting reality to control your emotions. Some of the deepest wounds don't come from actions, they come from the way someone makes you question your own feelings. They don't need to yell, command, or even do anything obvious. All they have to do is plant a small seed of doubt and repeat it just enough times to make you question the very foundation of your reality. At first, you're sure of what you saw, heard, and felt. But when they shake their head, deny it, or calmly say things like, "You're remembering it wrong," or "I never said that," confusion begins to set in. Their denial isn't harsh, it's subtle, composed, often paired with a gentle smile that disarms you from reacting strongly. And because they seem so confident, you begin to question yourself. You no longer trust what's true, not because they argue with you, but because they let you wrestle alone with the growing doubt inside you. You think, maybe I overreacted. Then, maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing. And eventually, what if I'm the problem? You start holding back things you once wanted to say, not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've stopped believing your feelings matter. You feel guilty for feeling anything at all. You're unsure whether you've understood what just happened, and you're even more unsure whether your reaction is valid. They don't have to silence you because you begin silencing yourself. And that's what makes gaslighting so dangerous. It doesn't make you fear them, it makes you stop trusting you. You slowly become dependent on them as a reality checker. You turn to them to verify your memory, to see if your reaction was reasonable, or just to make sure you're not being too much. But the more you ask, the more you surrender your right to decide what's real. The more you look to them for clarity, the more power you give to someone who's intentionally distorting your world. Gaslighting doesn't just confuse you, it robs you of your right to feel. You stop trusting your intuition, your emotions, the quiet signals inside. And when someone loses that connection to their inner self, they lose the ability to choose, to protect, or even to simply exist as a fully grounded human being. Stoic philosophy calls the mind an unbreachable fortress. If someone causes you to lose control over yourself, it means they've entered a space that only you should have the key to. Epictetus once said, "No one can harm you without your consent." That doesn't mean you're to blame for being manipulated. It means you have the right and the responsibility to reclaim your reality. You don't have to argue with a manipulator because they don't want logic. They want control. They're not looking for truth. They're looking for you to stop believing in what you once knew was certain. And the more you try to explain yourself, the more you're playing their game, a game where every fact gets twisted and every piece of evidence gets labeled as you being too sensitive. Instead, start by writing things down. Document their words, your reactions, your emotions. Not to use it against them, but to remind yourself that your feelings are real, that your memories aren't just imagined. Context matters. Details matter. Evidence matters. Keep that record because it will become your anchor when reality starts to blur. Next, find someone you trust to share what you're going through, not to fix it, but to be a mirror. Sometimes you just need one sane voice to remind you you're not crazy. A neutral observer, someone outside the fog, can help you see just how distorted the picture has become, and most importantly, remind you that clarity was once your default. Finally, set a boundary. Not with threats or anger, but with clarity and action. If they continue to deny, you can walk away from the conversation. If they intentionally confuse the facts, you can disconnect. If they refuse to respect what you know is true, there's no need to keep debating. You can't change the manipulator, but you can stop giving them access to your inner world. You can't make them stop rewriting the truth, but you can stop letting them rewrite you. And when you do, you don't just reclaim your voice, you reclaim the entire part of your identity that had been quietly distorted in silence. 4. Chronic dishonesty, the subtle betrayal that erodes trust. The most dangerous kind of betrayal doesn't come from one big lie, it's found in the small, repeated ones you've grown used to brushing off. These lies don't shout. They don't shock you. But over time, their quiet repetition numbs your sense of truth. At first, you may tell yourself it was just a misunderstanding, a harmless slip, or maybe even a way to protect you from a more complicated reality. But eventually, you realize this isn't a one-time event, this is a pattern. When you ask, they don't deny, but they also don't tell the truth. They deflect with vague answers, change the subject with humor, or worse, turn it back on you. You really think I would lie to you? It's not the lie itself that drains you, it's the lack of transparency. You're not being outright betrayed. You're being slowly drawn into a half-reality where you're left to piece together fragments, never given enough to see the full picture. They don't just hide facts, they hide intentions. They don't lie blatantly, but they build a gray zone where you're constantly left guessing, recalibrating, and living with a subtle undercurrent of doubt about the person in front of you. And that doubt, over time, doesn't just damage your trust in them, it starts to erode your faith in your own intuition, your judgment, and your inner compass. You start asking yourself, am I just being paranoid? Or maybe everyone keeps some things to themselves. And worst of all, maybe real love means knowing when to look the other way. But what you're overlooking isn't a mistake, it's a form of manipulation through ambiguity. The chronic liar doesn't need to be overtly cruel, they just need to keep you uncertain, controlled not by fear but by hope. Hope that they'll be honest next time. Hope that maybe this time is different. Hope that you're not being too harsh. But it's exactly that kind of worn-out hope that traps you in a foundationless relationship. A relationship without truth is a house built on sand. It may look fine, may even hold for a while, but the first storm will bring it down. In Stoic philosophy, truth is the foundation of character. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The honest man is strong, for he is not afraid of the light of truth." A liar doesn't fear truth because they're weak, they fear it because they know they'll lose control once it's exposed. So they distort reality, not to protect you, but to maintain the upper hand. They might claim they're hiding things to spare your feelings. But the real harm isn't the truth itself, it's that you had to find it alone. And when you become a detective in your closest relationship, you stop feeling loved and start feeling tested. You don't need to know everything about someone to love them. But you do need to know that what they do show you is real, or at the very least, not deliberately misleading. Trust doesn't require perfection, but it does require honesty. And when the truth is withheld on purpose, no matter how small, that's still a betrayal. So what should you do when you realize you're living in a filtered version of reality? First, stop justifying their behavior. If someone consistently avoids direct answers, frequently changes details, or forces you to ask the same question in different ways just to get part of the truth, the issue isn't your curiosity. The issue is their dishonesty. Next, set a clear boundary. You might say, I can't keep trusting someone who makes me feel like I have to investigate everything they say. Or trust can't survive if I'm always guessing what's being left out. You don't have to say it in anger, but you do have to say it with clarity. And if, after you've spoken clearly, they continue to blur the truth, you have every right to walk away. Not because you want control, but because you refuse to live in a reality where truth has to be hunted down. A healthy relationship doesn't require surveillance. It's built on willing trust. And if that can't exist, then you don't owe them more grace, you owe yourself your principles. Because at the end of the day, truth is not just information, it's the foundation of self-respect. And when you refuse to live in lies, you're not just preserving trust in the relationship, you're defending the clarity within your own soul, something no one ever has the right to blur. 5. Emotional blackmail, using guilt and false responsibility to control you. They don't raise their voice. They don't make threats. And they don't have to overtly control you. Instead, they manipulate you by making you feel guilty for doing what's right for yourself. Emotional blackmail isn't loud or aggressive, it's subtle, quiet control that uses your own compassion and loyalty against you. Every time you try to set a boundary, they don't argue, they sigh. When you say no to helping them, they don't lash out, they withdraw in silence, leaving you with a heavy sense that somehow you've done something wrong. They don't accuse you outright, but they drop phrases designed to trigger guilt. If you're okay walking away from your parents like this, well, that's your choice, or I guess I just don't matter to you anymore. These aren't direct attacks, but they make you feel like the bad person, even when all you're doing is protecting your health, your time, or your peace. When love gets twisted this way, it stops being connection and becomes a collar around your neck, tightening with the weight of obligation. You're no longer making choices based on your values or priorities. You're reacting to the fear of being seen as selfish, cold, or ungrateful. And when this pattern repeats, you begin living a life dictated by guilt, not by free will. Worse yet, emotional manipulators often play the role of the eternal victim. They always seem fragile the moment you need to be strong. They fall apart the second you need space. And they make you feel like if you don't absorb their pain, they'll fall apart. But the truth is, those who won't take responsibility for their own emotions will always demand that you carry them. They don't learn how to deal with sadness, they learn how to transfer it to you. They don't ask how much you can truly give, they measure your love by how often you abandon yourself for their comfort. Eventually, this emotional load wears you down, not because you love too much, but because you constantly had to sacrifice yourself to hold together a one-sided relationship. You begin living in a low-grade tension, always on guard, always managing the mood, always afraid that if you don't perform your role, the other person will sulk, lash out, or fall apart. But real love never requires you to give up your personal freedom, and genuine care never demands you feel indebted. According to Stoic philosophy, no one can control your emotions unless you allow them to. Epictetus once said, "Never regard another person's emotions as your responsibility. especially if they're using them to control you. Because emotions are personal property. If you do what's right and they feel hurt, that doesn't mean you were wrong. It simply means they need to learn how to manage themselves. You cannot heal someone by hurting yourself. You cannot sustain a relationship by erasing your own needs. And you cannot build real connection if the foundation is fear and guilt. What you need is clarity, not coldness, but conscious awareness. Ask yourself, if I didn't feel guilty, what would I choose? And let that answer guide you. Because true responsibility never comes with fear. If you feel pressured, manipulated by someone else's emotions, then it's no longer love, it's emotional blackmail. And once you see that clearly, you don't need to rebel, you just need to walk away. Not to punish them, but to finally free yourself from a role you never agreed to play. 6. When your kindness is taken for granted. No one really teaches you how to recognize when your kindness is being exploited, because kindness is often treated as something that should never have limits. You're encouraged to be selfless, to be generous, to keep giving, especially to the people closest to you. But at some point, you begin to feel it. No matter how much you give, it's never enough. No matter how hard you try, they somehow make you feel selfish the moment you stop. That's no longer mutual care, it's exploitation wrapped in the language of love and duty. They don't ask directly. They wait for you to offer. They don't express gratitude. They assume. They don't ask if you're okay. They simply say they need. And you, driven by your instinct to help, to preserve the relationship, to be seen as a good person once again, silence your own needs to meet theirs. Over time, you start losing sight of the line between generosity and self-erasure, between love and manipulation. You convince yourself, I'm doing this out of love. But love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself, only exploitation does that, leaving you drained and empty, with nothing in return but more expectations. People who exploit kindness don't have to be cruel. They just have to get used to your constant yes. They don't need to demand anything. They simply stay silent and let you carry the guilt. And they never acknowledge what you've done, because in their eyes, you're not helping them. You're just doing what you were supposed to do. The truth is, no one can be used for long unless they're afraid of losing the image of being the good one. But Stoic philosophy reminds you dignity doesn't come from pleasing others. It comes from living in alignment with yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Give freely not because you must, but because you choose to." If your action isn't grounded in freedom, even a good deed becomes a burden. So what should you do when you sense your kindness is being taken advantage of? First, ask yourself, if I stopped, what would they do? If the answer is they'd get angry, punish you with silence, or manipulate you with pity, that's not a healthy relationship. That's emotional dependency dressed up as connection. Next, try saying no, not to destroy the relationship, but to test it. A relationship built on mutual respect won't collapse just because you say no once. But if a single boundary causes them to withdraw, go silent, or make you feel like the villain, then you've just touched the true limit of that relationship. Finally, create a simple rule. Kindness is not obligation. You have the right to choose who you help, when, and to what extent. And if someone reacts negatively to the boundary you set, they're not disappointed, they're revealing their real intentions. You don't have to become cold or unfeeling. You just have to become clear with yourself and with others. Because someone who truly loves you will respect your boundaries, understand your limits, and appreciate your kindness, not treat it as something they're entitled to. 7. When they ask you to stay silent to protect them, not yourself. This is one of the most dangerous requests, because it doesn't ask you to give up your time, money, or emotions. It asks you to give up your voice and your dignity. They don't ask for forgiveness. They don't offer explanation. They just say one simple line, "Please don't tell anyone about this." And when you hesitate, they add, "If you say something, aren't you just tearing this family apart?" The trap is this. The request sounds noble, as if you're preserving harmony, sacrificing for others, protecting loved ones from pain. But in reality, you're not protecting anyone. You're covering up wrongdoing. You're enabling toxic silence. You're allowing unacceptable behavior to continue so someone else doesn't have to face the consequences of their own actions. Silence in situations like these isn't a neutral act. It's a surrender of your right to speak the truth. You begin to question, if I speak up, am I causing drama? If I stay quiet, am I doing the right thing for everyone? But the moment you start doubting your own sense of injustice, you've stepped into the territory of moral manipulation where responsibility is no longer on the one who caused harm, but on the one who dares to name it. Manipulators understand this well. They don't have to deny what they did, they just have to make you feel guilty for bringing it to light. They twist your role from the hurt one into the troublemaker, from the wounded into the one causing division. And just like that, they pressure you into censoring yourself. The truth is, you never owe anyone your silence about something that hurt you. Silence doesn't heal what continues to wound. Sometimes the truth needs to be spoken not to wage war, but to end a cycle of harm. Not to punish, but to reclaim your dignity. Stoic philosophy teaches that dignity doesn't lie in enduring everything, it lies in living in truth. Seneca once wrote, "Silence in the face of injustice is a betrayal of your own conscience." If what you're holding in keeps you awake at night, if it stops you from looking yourself in the mirror, that's not noble silence. That's spiritual imprisonment. So what should you do? First, learn the difference between privacy and suppression. You have the right to choose the time, the method, and the person you open up to, but you never have to pretend it didn't happen. No one has the right to ask you to bury your pain just to protect their image. Next, refuse to carry their burden for them. If someone is truly remorseful, they won't ask you to stay quiet. They'll face the consequences. If instead someone just wants to keep things peaceful, what they're really asking for is not forgiveness, but your complicity. And finally, remember this. You're not destroying the relationship. By telling the truth, you're revealing the cracks that were already there. A real relationship can survive the truth, even when it's hard. If a relationship can only exist on the condition that you stay silent about your pain, that's not love. That's a control system built on fear and blind sacrifice. Hold on to your voice. You don't need to shout. Just speak the truth with calm, with clarity, and with a self-respect that is not up for negotiation. No one enters this life instinctively knowing how to say no to family. We're raised to be accommodating, to keep the peace, to sacrifice for the sake of blood ties, even if that means giving up our inner peace. But if there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's this: being family does not give anyone the right to destroy you. Blood is not an excuse for repeated toxicity, manipulation, emotional distortion, or the exploitation of your kindness. Real love does not hurt you just to be loved back. True care does not come wrapped in lies, broken boundaries, or demands that ask you to abandon yourself. And being a devoted child or sibling never means enduring in silence for a lifetime. Maybe you've forgiven them more than once. Maybe you've stayed quiet, sacrificed, and hoped they would change. But there comes a time when you must stop, not because you've stopped loving them, but because you've started loving yourself. Self-worth isn't about how others treat you, it's about what you refuse to accept, even when it comes from those closest to you. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to become hard so you can punish others. It teaches you to stay whole so you don't lose yourself in relationships that make you question your worth. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Don't lose yourself in others even if they share your blood, because at the end of the day, you were not born to be the backdrop for someone else's selfishness. You were born to live with meaning, with dignity, and with a voice." Remember, you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no. You have the right to walk away from any relationship that makes you shrink. That is not betrayal, that is maturity. And if someone truly loves you, they will never punish you for choosing to heal. If something in this video stirred something inside you, don't ignore it. Start with one small step. Write down what you will no longer tolerate. Define one new boundary. Or simply take a deep breath and remind yourself, I deserve to be respected without conditions. You are not alone. You are not too sensitive. You are not wrong for wanting kindness. You're simply remembering your worth, and that is the very first step to healing.